a senior design. I'm currently working as a senior design lead at Airtel Digital. And Airtel Digital is actually the entertainment side at Airtel, which basically deals into music. We have a music app called Wink Music, and then there is a creator side to it, which is called Wink Studio, which allow the upcoming musicians to upload their content on the platform and basically start earning. And then I also look into the Airtel Extreme, which is the video consumption platform from Airtel, which is available on your mobile phones, Android and iOS, as well as desktop and as well as the large screen TVs, which are Android TVs, and like you would have seen smart TVs as well. And then I also look into gaming, which is quite a recent product from Airtel. It's actually in MVP phase, and we will be live in June with that, with the very first version. So basically, these are the products that I'm looking at right now, and my journey starts way back. Uh, I did my engineering. I started working as a software developer. I worked with Infosys and Wipro for about 3 years, and then that was the time when I realized I have to do something extra, which wasn't what could be that. So I started cancelling out the options. I thought MBA to nahi karna hai, and then I thought okay, MTech bhi nahi karna hai. Then I somehow came across design and I found it quite interesting as well. That is where the complete journey for design started. I got a chance to get into an ID. uh, I spent 3 years working on very social projects, which were mostly involved with some kind of NGOs and all. And then later on, I started my corporate journey working with Paytm, and then I switched to Urban Company, and coming back to today, where I'm working at Airtel. So today, like we are talking about experiments and how do we design experiments for while working on a particular product. Uh, so as a designer, I think even you will be a lot of people will connect to me on this. Like whenever we are designing, whenever we are creating a screen or any kind of a design for us, often we develop a strong connection with it, right? And we tend to think that everything that we are designing is actually perfect and no one can challenge it, right? But that's not the exact way, right? There are scenarios where we need to evaluate, or we should evaluate if everything that we're designing is it's actually meeting the expectation or not, right? uh, Talking about that, let's what is the expectation from a product designer, right? So if I talk about a product designer is basically is expected to build products which works better for the company, right? Basically the products which allow company to make more and more money. So if you look at from a perspective of a business manager who is responsible to earn money, so they are dependent on the designers directly to basically imagine and create and ship highly performing designs that can make money and can help the product grow.
Yeah.
But the question comes, how can you make a design perform better, right? And the answer to it would be by consistent experimentation and validation of it. So what is actually experimentation? So experimentation is nothing but trying small changes at a scale and occasionally failing, and using the results to understand and learn and grow and optimize your own design. Every time you perform an experiment, maybe even if it's a smallest of change, maybe even a change of a button or change of a color, you will want to understand how users are responding to it. You will try to learn their behavior, and whatever you have learned, you want to implement that so that every time you make a design, it is progressively better than the previous one made. And the ultimate goal of experimentation is actually to make a better product, to come up with features which user will like and start using the product. But here the questions come that why do we actually need to experiment? Why can't I just have a feature built in and figure out a feature which user may like and directly build it? And answer to that is very basic. It's human behavior that we are actually very terrible to know what people want. And if you think about that, like keeping the complete company, the entire company at stake, uh, just behind an idea, a thought, and just because someone feels like that it will work, that's a very dangerous situation, and no one would want to be in that situation. So in the end, we need to experiment, and incremental experiments can help the the company, the designer, to learn and understand the real impact of the changes that are being made in the incremental manner, improve the results of the experiments, allows a designer to optimize the design, the interactions, maybe the pricing model if required, and also the features which are continuously being rolled out. And most importantly, experimentation helps us reduce the risk. Every time we experiment on a certain feature, we release it to a small number of user. Basically, that helps that whatever release that we have made, whatever feature that we have made, it would be only experimented with the 1% of user, or maybe a small segment of user, and larger user will not be impacted. That certainly reduces the risk of and to understand the basically to get the bad news at the early stage of the product designing itself. And if there is something which is not working at that moment, we can obviously go back and rework on it. Let's talk about experimentation a little more. So what makes a good experiment, right? uh, so a good experiment is an experiment which leads you, or which leaves you with with an actionable insight, where which can give you an insight where you can actually go back and make some changes, and let it be positive or let it be negative, but you will have a result in the end. If you talk about what could be the components, or what could be the small things that one should keep in mind while making a good experiment, it can be divided into five basic components. Very first is problem. So a good experiment solves the real user problem, the problem that the your end user is facing, not and not the problem which is basically brought up by maybe an outcome of a thought, or outcome of a business requirement or something. It's actually the user who is in the center of the complete problem, which matters the most. And these problems are often discovered through analyzing the data, maybe looking at the customer insights, looking at the research data that we have, and evaluating the complete experience. Second component of basically an experiment can be user. So whenever we are designing an experiment, we need to design it for a particular audience. So the audience size should be clearly mentioned, should be clearly thought about, that who will see it, and whose life will this impact. So there could, and also the behaviors that this particular user will maybe undergo. The third component is basically benefits. So good experiment knows the benefit that they are giving to the user, and there can also be trade-offs. For example, maybe increasing a pricing of a certain, of maybe a subscription, may also decrease the retention of user. That user might start opting out of the subscription packages because we are increasing the price of it. That may
Sorry,
eventually.
Manik, you're not very audible.
Hello.
Yeah,
And any better now?
yeah, much better. Please
Okay.
continue.
Should I repeat from the starting, or is it fine?
No, you can start with the third point. I think you're talking about benefits. Yeah.
Benefits, yeah. Okay, so I was talking about benefit, which is the third and important component of basically creating a good experiment. So good experiment, while creating a good experiment, we should know the benefit that we are giving to the user, and we should also consider the trade-offs.
Yeah.
Trade-off as in whenever you are maybe pitching an idea for an experiment. For example, if you say that let's increase the price of our subscription so that we'll start earning more money, but the trade-off can be that the moment you start increase the money, maybe the user will start opting out of the subscription.
Yeah.
So benefits acts like both pros and cons that we should uh, keep in mind while creating the experiment. Fourth
Probably
component, sorry.
if yeah, I was saying if like when it comes to benefits, probably we'll have more loyal customers who find a good benefit from the product and maybe want to continue even at a higher subscription. Maybe that
I,
helps filter out the users.
right, exactly. So basically, benefits is something which uh, so when you are designing an experiment, you basically keep the benefit in your mind as in what are you giving to the user,
Yeah.
what positive thing are you giving, and are there any negative fallbacks that are possible, maybe by just giving this option,
Right.
right? Fourth component of the experiment is feature. So good experiments always provide with one or more solutions that you may believe will create value for the user. So one thing is benefit that we talked about, which is the core important thing that we are giving, but there always can be multiple positive things of adding value adding things that we are introducing to the user, which can act to the delight factor itself. And the most important part of an experiment is the data. So good experiments are built around metrics. These are the ultimate goals that we want to change. Uh, and basically we will have to define every time whenever we are working on an experiment that which metric do we want to change and to how much do we want to change.
Mhm.
And
Right.
like talking about metrics are like I mentioned the very starting of the call itself. Like metrics are the quantifiables or numbers which basically you measure to identify if any change that you have done is
It's,
going towards a positive or a negative acceptance.
right.
Then overall metrics, the whole metric, the overall metric of our products are usually same. These are mostly monthly active users, your
Mhm.
daily active users, your retention is basically how many users are coming to the platform and then sticking to you. Acquisition is the new users active new users onboarded during a given amount of time, and
Yeah.
then ultimately uh, your onboarding time and your go to market time. So if you look at any product, mostly these are the ultimate business metrics that are being tracked. And then they can be, there's also called something called NPS, which is a very experience driven or very experience centric metric. NPS is called Net Promoter Score, which basically is a score which tells you that if a user would want to refer your product to maybe a friend or someone he know. So
We can
it somewhere helps you to understand that if you're getting a positive feedback or a negative feedback for your own product.
can we actually get to know if someone will in fact recommend the product or not from metrics?
So what we do, we calculate NPS, and NPS is more like, I think you if you would have seen the products like Swiggy, where they ask you to rate the delivery experience, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
They
Right,
ask you
right.
to they then you at first they ask you to maybe rate on a scale of 5 stars.
Yeah,
You give any of the you select any of the stars, then they ask you further question. They might
right.
ask you, was the behavior of the delivery guy right or not? Was he wearing the dress or not? And they also will ask you at times, And do you want to refer the particular app to a friend or not?
Right.
So,
Okay.
and basically this data is actually kind of taken in a very variable manner, that maybe you might be able to look at such an option to give a feedback, but I might not. and
Yeah.
and I will look at it at I will be able to look at it at a different frame of time. Maybe at that time you would not have that option, and over
Right.
the period of a month or 6 months, we collate the complete data and then have a uh, what you call analysis on it to figure out where the feedback is going.
Okay. Right.
So
Got
next thing is how to run a powerful experiment. So basically, experiments are very essential part of the product life cycle, like I mentioned, and one need to make bets and build products, track results, and get real world feedback, and then implement to make in their next sprints. That's how the complete cycle function. The basically the process of creating a powerful product experiment can be easily divided into 4 steps. Very first step is ask the right question, then create a hypothesis, conduct your experiments, and communicate results. We'll deep dive in them in the coming slides. Very first type, very first step, ask the right question. So experimentation starts with finding the opportunities, and to find the opportunity, we need to ask right questions, and these questions help to figure out what you might want to change. For example, uh, these questions can be: what would happen if you increase our pricing? uh, what will happen if you get rid of the try for free model? And
it.
what do users keep leaving? Why do keep it user keep leaving after a month?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if you think maybe from a Netflix perspective, right? Maybe you're working for a company like Netflix who are very strongly dependent on subscription. So whenever we are doing any experiments, questions like these about on pricing models, free models are very important to ask right at the starting of the starting of the experiments. And basically, to ensure that you are asking right questions, there are further few very basic steps that can be followed, that you have, so that you make sure that you have right questions answered.
Yeah.
Very first is that you define the area of experimentation and list your assumptions. So let's say you are worried about user retention, that users are leaving your platform, and you want to understand what is the reason, and how can you make sure that this retention is as maximum as possible. So you'll most likely to have a lot of questions around it that impacts the user retention, and around what features or what changes can we make to improve it, and so on, right? Similarly, you will have a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
Assumptions as in ki, why will user click around, as well as maybe why the user will stick around, as well as
Mm.
currently thinking about why will you what will you do to validate it. If
Right.
someone is sticking back, what is that feature that this person is liking, right?
Mm.
So very first step can be that you gather all these things and maybe write them in a list format on a piece of paper, that whatever questions that you have in your mind, what assumptions that you are making, and if there is any validation required.
Do you think it would help if we can define some personas to see what are the different scenarios in which the user might use the product and what are the features that might be beneficial, which might help them, which might help in the retention?
Exactly. So that is actually coming in that I'll be discussing about the same in maybe step 2. So
Right.
that is a very important point. Well, like whenever you're making questions, you have to be very certain about who are the users and how will they perceive a certain question, what would be their response.
Right.
So yeah, coming to step 2, that you can maybe follow to have to make sure that you are asking right question at the starting of the experiment. Step 2 is drilling down to the initial questions that you had. Drill down, have multiple questions, break these questions and decisions that you have made into further steps. Like for example, you can maybe, when we were talking about retention, so maybe next drill down questions can be that how many user left us in last 30 days, or what features our consumers who are sticking around are using. And also maybe there are, if there are any small changes, any low hanging fruits that we can do just to see the direct impact on the retention. So
Right.
when whenever you have some questions ready, try to drill down further so that you have the scope defined for what do you want to do. And by the end of this exercise, I there would be a lot of questions and sub questions at your table, and then there would be kind of a confusion on what to pick and what not to pick. Very basic thing to follow is just what to decide. If you're working with a team, have a consensus. A democracy model perfectly works here. uh, Let team vote on what requirement to be picked and what things like a look like a better bet to have and what we can take forward in the market. If not, the if there is no team, then ideally the best way is that you should pick up one of the requirements that you think is working best for you. And then final step for uh, final step would be that you turn your problems into the problem statement. You can basically follow how might we model, which is very popular around. You can simply uh, make some questions around like how might we increase our user retention, how might we persuade users who are about to churn, how might we get unengaged users and try more features. Basically, once you are done with all those things, you reach to step two when you create an testable hypothesis. uh, Question is, what is the testable hypothesis? So a hypothesis is basically a proposed explanation made on the basis of the evidences that we have from the previous stage. It usually serves uh, like a roadmap for the or and the initial starting point of the further investigation that we will be doing with our experiments. For example, if you are saying that will the change of color amount to increase in any price, will the change of color impact the pricing model, or will if we change the color of the price that we're showing on the subscription page, will it affect anywhere on the subscription number of subscriptions that are being made, or the number of users who are subscribing to the users? Those can be the basic hypothesis that we can think about. A well-structured hypothesis gives you a roadmap where you are of what you are testing, that is the desired outcome, the matrix that matters, and the other essential details. There could be several part of the hypothesis as well, several components. Very first thing is
Mm.
the business outcome. So, what what is the outcome that you would like to see, that you are persuading when you are preparing for an experiment? What business goals that you are trying to change? So experiment needs to define the success upfront. Whenever you are maybe validating an hypothesis, you have to say that this hypothesis is validated when maybe we see a change in a metric, which can be maybe retention metric, by maybe 5%. Second thing, which you also pointed out, is the user group and personas. So we need to figure out that who are we testing this with? Is there any specific user persona that we are looking for, uh, or will this experiment go out on the random groups? That can also be a possibility where this can go out to a random group to the entire user base on maybe a fractional basis, and then we can get the answers accordingly. Third thing is user behavior. So what is the user behavior that we will that this particular experiment will drive? In other words, what do you want users to do that will increase your metric? For example, if you talk about a subscription model, what maybe you change the color of the button. Here, the behavior that you would expect, that since I've changed it a little more prominent, maybe I change it from white to red. So this will become a little more noticeable for the user, and user will be clicking more on it, right?
Okay.
Fourth part is features or solution. So what are we doing to influence the user behavior? Basically, which is helping us to reach our own business goals. These are the solutions that you're giving to the user, which is helping them to basically make sure that if they really want to subscribe or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, third step of creating an experiment is directly conduct your experiment and start monitoring your data. So putting a hypothesis in place will actually tell you everything that you need to know about running an experiment. What are you doing? Who are you targeting? What metrics that you are tracking, and why you think that it actually matters, that you really want, if you want to validate an hypothesis or not. And how you run an experiment can completely depend on what you are testing. So there can be scenarios where you might want to do an A/B test because you have two variants. There can be scenarios that you want to do a test with mass number of people. Basically, the most common type of experiments are, first, that I just recently called out, A/B test. Here, what happens that usually you have two variants, and
Yeah.
you basically divide your audience cohort into two
Mm.
segments, A and B, and you show them the variants accordingly, and basically get their responses, randomly showing them the whatever variants you have on your design, and basically understanding their feedback and make sure and validating based on the basis. Then second is also is the multivariant test, which is very similar to AB, but it is mostly used when you have multiple variants. So similarly, it'll work like A, B, C, D. You make multiple variants and you have multiple segments of audience. You show them your variants and you get the responses. And then there is funnel experiments. So funnel is basically the number of steps involved to reach the end goal. Taking an example of same subscription itself. So if we talk about a subscription journey, it starts from maybe looking at a content, maybe looking at a movie. You press the button I want to watch, then you go to a subscription page where you have a pitch, you select a plan, then you go to the payment page, and then you pay. So all these steps are basically called steps of a funnel. So whenever you are making changes in the complete journey in an incremental manner, you basically go with funnel experiments. Then there is time lapse. It is very commonly used in case when we don't have an AB capability. In this, what happens that you release a version with a small with a variant, measure the metric right before the release, and also uh, measure it after a certain time. And
Oh,
after, whenever you release a new variant, you do it linearly. You measure the metric and figure out what is the difference, if there is any impact happening or not. Finally, you need to just make sure that the testing, while testing your experiment, you're testing it for long enough, for basically good results. At times what happens that you do your experiment and you get an initial jump and you close it, but that's not the right way. Next thing is, how do you know that if the experiment data is invalid or valid? So, so when we are running these kind of experiment, there are various number of reasons because of which the data that we are collecting as an outcome of the experiment can uh, feel invalidated. These reasons are basically contamination because of running multiple tests at once. So when you are running multiple number of, for example, A/B test on your single product, at times it gets very difficult to understand that because of which experiment a particular metric is uh, being affected.
mm.
This will completely change. For example, if you are changing maybe style of a button throughout your platform, so this will not only change your maybe onboarding process, but might also change your subscription and maybe the content consumption process as well. So these
Right.
this can affect your data that you are expecting at the end of the experiment. Then one of the reasons when that you say that the data is cannot be accepted as the valid data is because of the size of the audience that we have selected. So if the size is quite small, it should ideally be at least 1% of the complete audience base that we have. If it's little too small, then you can obviously say that it is little biased, and we
Yeah.
will certainly have to consider that this data is invalid, and we might not consider it. Then, like I mentioned, third reason is mostly stopping too early. So, like I said, usually what happens at the moment you change anything on your product, you might see a little jump in the number, maybe at the first week itself, and then you validate saying this experiment is successful. But this might not be the real world scenario. Usually what happens, you will have to study the complete experiment for about a month at least, and figure out how the users are performing throughout the month, and then maybe evaluate it. So don't get really excited when you see initial jumps.
Mhm.
Fourth, very basic thing is the external events. Like everyone knew, one of the example is COVID, the pandemic. When this happened, no one was ready. No one, not even a single product was expecting this. So there can be these kind of scenarios as well, which might affect the complete uh, your data that you're getting after the experiment is done. And then the final step of running an experiment is communicating the result and acting on them. So a good experimentation process is like a never-ending cycle. Every result, both positive and negatives, gives you some kind of data point to create a new hypothesis. So basically, there is no failure or success for an experiment, but to a metric, right? So even when you say that your experiment is failing, you will have some or the other insight to build on it, to
Yeah.
create another hypothesis, and to work towards a new experiment.
Right.
And once an experiment is completed, the results need to be understood and communicated and implemented to the next sprint or next cycle that we are doing. Right? Uh, how
Right.
can we do that? Basically, first of all, you should have an action plan ready. So before you start, know what's gonna happen, and what are the next things which are depending on the results that we are expecting. This could be very basic, like do you need to dig in and get more info on a certain result, or can you use the same result to maybe have a bigger experiment in place? Or for example, maybe if you failed, you might want to have a further experiment to maybe check why did you fail. What can we do something with the validation of the experiment itself? So first thing is that. Second thing is implementing the results. uh, Whether it means creating a new hypothesis or launching a feature or making sure that you follow through on your action plan, as in do you want to make new experiments, validate any results? So you should be ready with that and start implementing it the moment the experiment is finished, and celebrate the small wins.
Right.
It's really important because at times you might not meet the expected results. For example, you maybe while starting the experiment, you expected that I'll be able to reach or maybe make an increment of 5% in the retention metric,
Yeah.
but it might reach to just 2 or 2.5%. That does not mean that the experiment failed. That's a small win, and you should basically celebrate that because it's an ongoing cycle. You need to pump up the motivation, you need to be involved in the process. So do celebrate every small win, and pretty much that's it. This is how the complete process looks like of creating an experiment and implementing in it. So experimentation in a way is more like an action oriented way, and that planning and those endless meetings and those discussions can never meet. Like
But
over the time.
I have a question here. So you
Yeah,
said experimentation is an endless cycle, right? So
yeah.
when we pick a particular feature which has been failing constantly or is not giving the expected result, when do we know is the right amount of experiments to have, or when do we know it's time to stop experimenting on that particular feature and move on to the next one?
So basically, if you see it, the first thing is the dedication towards the feature itself. If you feel that this feature is something that this would really change the life of the users, then you would obviously want to pursue it more. But if it's constantly failing, there could be few things that can be wrong. Either you are not planning your experiments in the right way, because actually the experiments are designed in a way that every time you have some kind of positive outcome out of it and you implement that, turning into the next phase. So
Yeah.
usually those things does not happen, but if something is failing, that is mostly either the plan is completely off and you don't want to pursue it, more like a very self or a very, what do you call, a business level call, I'll say.
Okay. Right.
So yeah, so pretty much that's it. I'll, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Guys in the audience, you guys want to unmute and ask your questions, you can do that now.
Yeah, I have one question for you, Manik. So, whatever the framework you have given for the experimentation, is this
Yeah.
like depend on individual person or the whole industry like follow this process? Like,
So what I have given you is very pretty much core of mostly what most of the people follow. Though there are a lot of other frameworks available as well, but the core still remains the same.
okay, got you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Hi
Rakesh.
Maanik, Palak here.
Hi, Palak.
Yeah, hi. So is experimentation similar to creating prototypes, or how is it?
Experimentation, I'll say it's not similar, but creating prototype is part of experimentation. So you create one of the very initial experiments can be that you create a prototype and maybe talk to maybe various number of audience. But what happens with prototype is that the scale is not able to meet. How many people would you able to reach and show your prototype to, right? In that scenario, usually we do an experimentation where we make different variants and try to release it to wider audience to to basically make sure that we have more number of responses and we can analyze more data.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Parag.
And one more I have for you. See,
Yeah.
the experimentation process we use here would be only for the new feature or like improvising the feature also. Like it can be used
It's
only
for
for the
both.
launch of a new.
It's for both. It's for both. Like if
Uh,
you want to release a new feature, so usually what happens, at least from where I am coming from, you release an MVP. MVP is like you release a minimal feature where you try to understand if the user is accepting it or not. Only if you receive some kind of a feedback, positive feedback, you would want to invest more time and money on it, right? So
mhm.
this kind of experimentation, this particular framework work in both the scenarios, if you want to release a new feature as well as if you want to maybe improvise on the existing one.
Okay, thanks.
Is there only an individual way to sit and go through metrics, or are there some softwares or platforms that we can use as an individual or as a company to get quick metric uh,
So there
quantities?
are usually this is done by tools itself.
Yeah,
Doing it manually would be very difficult. Uh, Few tools very importantly which I use is Google Analytics. It gives
right.
you tap or CTR at every possible button or an image, which is one of the very important metric that we track. Then we also use a tool called Tableau. Tableau is something which helps us in generating the data on how many people are being onboarded daily, onboarded monthly, how many people are leaving the platform, how much is the engagement time, how much of the time that user is spending on the platform. These things that we at Airtel use Tableau for.
Right. Okay. This might be off topic, but I kind of want to know what your a day at Airtel is like as a design lead.
So for my days is actually very busy usually. So since I said I'm looking at multiple products, so my most of the time goes in initial brainstorming, where we go and discuss if we really want to work on a particular feature or not, what strategies do we have in hand, if there is any data to look at, to, do we want to initiate any kind of research. So most of the time goes in that, and then the second half of my day usually goes with brainstorming with my own team, where I like to, well, I spend some time to unblock them, help them, support them in whatever problems that they are facing, giving feedback, or having any kind of a session where I can help them to unblock and reach their potential.
Okay. Right. So you must be shifting between different features on a daily basis or different platforms, like you said, the
Exactly.
music,
So
gaming.
exactly. So I said ki I look at mobile apps, I look at apps for the TV, and I also we are exploring apps for CarPlay and Apple Watch, and then there are dashboards also involved. So I keep switching, but initially I'll say I found it a little hectic. But if you'll realize, core of UX is not depending on the platform but on the user itself. So now I think I've completely accepted that, and I feel much more productive that way. So I feel it, then I feel that there is no break. Whenever I want a break, I switch to a new product and spend some time there.
Right. But it might get very cluttered, right, when you're trying to organize one of the
It
any platform.
I'll say it's more like a, it's, I'll say it's not a clutter, but it's something which is, I'll say it's thrill. So when you are
Mhm.
working in such kind of a high paced environment where there are so many products, and it's also a choice that what kind of a environment you want to work in. If you want to work in a service environment, then you might be given one requirement at a time and you have a much more streamlined day at work. But I like it much more when it's much more thrilling, much more adventurous, where you have almost new requirement every time. There are at times scenarios where we come up with ideas which no one has even thought about.
Right. Yeah. And if you have to say after receiving the metrics, right, you figure out that you have to change a particular feature. Has it ever happened that it affects the entire design system that you have in place for so many years together? So I'm sure Airtel also must be having a
Sure,
design
it
system, right?
happens. It happens. So, like, I think usually what happens whenever you create a design system, you create it with a mindset कि यार बना दिया. Now it will sustain for a long time, but that's
Exactly.
not true. A design system keep on evolving, so it stays there. Like my personal experience is that it stays there for about 3 months, that as a perfect design system. But then after 3 months you will receive something new where you might have to make a change, maybe a new feedback or a new feature, where you might have to introduce something new into the design system itself.
Right. So that kind of, you might be facing a pushback if you ever mention that you have to kind of alter the design system, right? Like from different stakeholders. Has that ever happened before? Or
So far, I'll say the changes are not that we have faced on design system are not something which completely changed, as in from this change the design system altogether, but it was more like an incremental change where we are making things better. For example,
right.
a font change. So we had a previously we were using Inter as a one of the fonts, but the moment we moved to large screens, TVs and all, it wasn't coming out that well. So we had to go and change the font to maybe, for example, plus Jakarta. We are moving to that. So that did not mean that we will have to write the complete typography end to end.
Mhm.
It was still there. We just started using different font and defined new typography for the large screen TVs.
Right. And one thing about metrics, so in Airtel also, right, you would be catering to people from different global backgrounds, right, with different languages and different
Yep.
environmental setups. So has it ever happened that the metrics vary in such a huge way where probably for the Indian audience it works completely well, and for some other audience it's a complete fail, that particular feature? So when it's like that, how do you deal with a
So
like a conclusion?
it, yeah. So not I have faced this not in Airtel, but when I was working with urban company. So
Right.
there is basically you if you would have used urban company, there is a cleaning service that they provide. So that cleaning service, the complete funnel was working perfectly for India. It had a great adoption rate, about 85% or something. But
Right.
the moment we moved to Singapore, it's
Uh,
completely crashed. It like within it initially got a jump of about 10-15%, then it started almost to zero, went almost close to zero. And the
wow.
whole reason behind that in India we don't do that strong verification of the people. Basically, we just do the Aadhaar card and we are fine. But in Singapore, they have a very strong vetting process. They have to get certain number of certificates and all. And also in India, we whenever someone is coming at our home, we there is at least someone looking at that if person is working or not, right? But in
Correct.
Singapore, what happens? They believe that they'll give you the key, you go complete your service, and then come back. So the
Yeah.
complete scenario changed. So in that case, what we did, there was no other option but to create two parallel journeys based on
Oh,
the regions. So for Singapore, we had a different journey in place, which had these kind of steps where we were trying to gain more trust from the user on the complete waiting process. And in India, we are using the current implementation itself.
okay. So you're saying it's fine if we even have to split the whole user journey depending on whichever
Exactly. So there was no
platform.
other way. And then we also faced a similar thing when we moved to Dubai, because
Okay.
in the Gulf area, it's Arabic centric country. The complete reading pattern is different. So the structure of the app completely destroys, and they don't like looking at the app in the English language itself. They prefer they would prefer another app, maybe a lower quality, but if it's in Arabic, they would prefer that. So we have faced these kind of challenges, but always, but like we had to figure out a way to maybe come across solutions. And one solution was this, like I mentioned, creating parallel versions and
Yeah.
then managing that.
So in this case, you had to build the entire app in Arabic itself.
Exactly. So very first solution was that. Then the next thing that we did, we we build on our own design system, and we worked for a neutral, I'll say, typography, where we just change the font from Arabic to Hindi, and it just goes left and right. That's it. The whole spacing, imagery, everything remains the same. We
Oh,
had to
okay.
build towards that. It was kind of an effort, but it worked fine then.
So which font would you recommend if you're working on a global platform or a multilingual platform?
Oh, that would be very specific. So I actually haven't come across one font which caters to all. There are mostly specific to every region. So I cannot think of one font right now.
Right.
Maybe I'll have to Google it and maybe come back to you with that answer.
Sure. Yeah. Does anyone else have a question? Please feel free to unmute and ask. Utkarsh, if you have as well.
Yeah, definitely. So, Manik, I wanted to actually understand how do you guys take feedback from the community? For example, you said you work on the Wing app.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I believe you guys would be doing some of competitive analysis, and then how exactly do you build certain features in the app? Is it entirely based upon how much people are engaging on different screens? What is the user journey from different screen to screen? Or how exactly do you do it?
So basically, there are various way to do it. For example, if we are working on a new feature, right? For example, we launched a feature called Hello Tunes on Wink app, which basically allows you to put a caller tune on your phones if someone calls you, so you can the person will be able to hear a certain song that you applied for. So that was a dormant feature for Airtel, and it was happening through regular phone call when people used to call and then tell us that I want to apply this particular song. What we did initially, we did a market research to understand if there is actually requirement for it or not, because we were also confused that why will someone pay to put a song that someone else will listen to, you are also not listening it to. And
Right.
it has been always a very open question for us. There hasn't been a specific answer, but when we were doing this market research to understand the acceptance of the particular feature, we received a very good response. And that was the kind of our initial moment when we thought, let's try to push it on the app itself, where let's give a when people are willing to apply for that particular feature, maybe through a phone call itself, it would be much more better for them if they can do it from the app itself. That was one of the places where we did market research. And then when that particular feature went on to be a hit, we then started looking at what more users are looking for. And we, like I said, we were following the complete experimentation process. There were a lot of ideas, lot of hypotheses that came in place, where we thought, what if this ringtone can be personalized, maybe based on who is calling. For example, if my mom is calling, she'll listen to some other song, and if my wife is calling, she might listen to different song. And then we started doing these kind of ABs. And this after receiving those data, analyzing those data, we were able to make a better judgment on it. And we are again launching a new upgradation to Hello Tunes, which is called Spatial Tunes, where you can do this kind of segregation. So this is how usually it happens. There is not a single way to define that this is what this will work every time. I'll say it completely depends on what state and what requirement you have.
Okay, so do you guys also take or contribute to the business calls, or is it other way around? You guys get that this is the business problem statement, then you guys work on the design side.
So actually, what we do is we don't ask. Usually what happens when business comes to you, they come up with a solution. They'll say ki, yaar, please do this because we want to earn money. Then that my job usually, since I'm the lead, is to pull them back and go back to the reason that what do you want to do, what do you want to achieve. And then the complete brainstorming start, that ठीक है, okay, one, what you are suggesting can be one of the options, but there can be several other options. Let's perform a test, let's brainstorm a bit, and let's figure out what will work better.
Right.
So there is a question in the chat that I believe has been left unanswered. So this is, how can a designer or a developer use Google Analytics when they are working on a highly confidential project? And the user says they think Google Analytics is good when project is exposed to customer, that is B2C, but can it be done similarly for B2B as well?
So I think there is no restriction as such. You can use Google Analytics on both B2B as well as B2C apps. But Google Analytics has been quite popular and quite successful in B2C environment. That is particularly because of the scale, because the moment you release your app on a Play Store, it is exposed to millions of users, and then it's get really difficult to get feedback from them. In B2B scenarios, for example, making a banking application for maybe Indian bank or something, at any moment of time that your application will be exposed to the people who are managing that bank, which will be still a very countable number, maybe a few thousands, right? Which is where the feedback can also be taken in a manual or or a maybe Excel sheet manner, whatever works. But but there is still no restriction that if you would want to use Google Analytics on B2B platform, it's completely open.
In case if any other participant wants to ask something from Maanik, then please feel free to
Yeah,
ask,
please feel free.
and you can unmute yourself and directly post a question here.
Yeah. I had a question before that. So obviously apps make a huge difference in how in easing out the whole process. But when it comes to a company like Airtel, right, where you have a lot of people in the rural areas as well who use
Yeah.
this service. So in that case, do you think they would still prefer going through an application, or would they still prefer to go through the customer service direct phone calls and stuff like that to solve their problems.
Yeah. So this is again one of the assumptions that we had, and we tried validating it, because Airtel has a very huge base in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. But with Geo coming in place, where they just distributed free internet everywhere,
Ah.
and we are actually now building on top of it. So it basically gave access to phone everywhere, right?
Mhm.
But one of the problems that we faced was the linguistic part, where
Mm.
maybe a person maybe sitting in a rural area of Rajasthan might not be comfortable in reading in English, right? Or maybe so. The answer to that was to go a little more visual, that
Right.
you have more imagery in place, you have more icons in place, and if possible, you write the more what you call local text if possible. But that again require a lot of effort, because India has a lot of languages, lot of dialects, lot of terminologies. But
Right.
so far, using of imagery has worked a lot. But
Awesome.
uh, there, I'll say people still reach out on app a lot, and
Mhm.
there are people who would even take effort to maybe leave comment on your Play Store as well. They know how to do that, so it's quite amazing to basically absorb that, where we kind of have an assumption that people might not be able to do it, but they are quite proficient in it.
Okay, that's surprising.
You look at TikTok, right? You look
Yeah.
at TikTok, you look at the mass that they were catering to, like people who were not maybe comfortable, maybe calling on phone on smartphone, but they were comfortable in making videos on TikTok.
Video. Right.
Yeah.
But then, Manik, for example, let's say you said for the rural part or certain different regions, so let's say even consider the age group that is on an older side.
Hmm.
So I personally have seen cases wherein, let's say, when we bring a change in the app
Hmm.
and the UI front end, etc., gets changed, then
Hmm.
people usually find difficult in the start to find out the user journeys now because, for
Exactly.
example, Cred is an app that frequently keeps on changing their UI.
Yeah.
And now, even for me, being a user who is just 25 years old, I
Hmm.
actually find it very difficult to again find the icons, find my way around how I can go to this part. And
Yeah.
then basically, they change the entire UI UX of the app. So,
Exactly.
is this something that is okay to do, or how is your take on this?
I think it completely depends on the end user. So if you talk about Cred is a very niche platform. If you remember, initially they started with the invite only format, where they made it like an elite club only that you will be able to access if you have an invite, and they are completely following that strategy itself. So when they and if you look at Cred, the complete motivation for a user to use Cred is the delight factor. They are not solving any substantial problem. Whatever they were doing, it's already in place with multiple different versions, right? But only reason behind using the Cred application is the delight factor. The changes that they make, or the subtle animations that they'll put in, those are something which maybe the niche that they are catering to are liking. But if I talk about something like Airtel, where the what do you call the end user, the amount of end user is enormous. There are millions of people. It's very difficult to do that. And for us, we always try, if you're making any change, that it should be subtle and incremental. Because for us, the end user is right from a kid who might want to look at a cartoon on a television, to a grandfather who would want to maybe pay an electricity bill. So the spectrum of end user is very huge. So I think this strategy completely depends on what users you are catering to.
Yeah,
And I
makes
think
sense.
also providing hints whenever you change a feature to kind of help them analyze what the user journey is with that particular feature might also help. So is that something Airtel does as well?
So we, like I said, we don't push very big changes. If
Mhm.
there are any subtle changes, we do provide hints as well, so that there is something to be go up to, something to that they can consider as help, or maybe We also provide a lot of direct help support. Like we have a lot of people, lot of foot power, that if you have any problem, the moment you will call us or register a request, within few hours there would be someone at your doorstep to cater it to. So it's like advantage of Airtel, I'll say, that they have such a big network. This might this might differ based on companies, based on the network or resources that they have, but in Airtel this functions like that.
Okay, got it. Sorry, Utkarsh, go ahead. You were asking
Yeah,
something.
and I believe that is where the metrics also come in place. Whenever you guys do a change, then you would be analyzing if the stats are the same, the journeys are the same, or is
Exactly.
it
So
bringing some betterment?
I'll talk you about I'll tell you about one of the recent experiments that we did. So we moved from a white theme to a dark theme on Wink app, and it took about 6 months for us to do that. And the only reason was this experiment, because though the app was looking very nice in dark mode, and all the visuals were very nice, experience was completely enhanced, but still we were not comfortable because of the mass that we have about 10 to 12 million daily active users who come and visit our app. So for that, we did initial experiment with just 1% of users, where we first of all we just gave them a pop-up to tell them that we have a dark theme available. Please go and change. And then we figured out how many people opted for it. And it was initially about 30% about. That was still a number that we thought we can take a bet on. Then next version we did, that we on those 30% we tried pushing the dark mode itself, and then we tried analyzing it with the people who were using in the white mode, and tried to compare how much is the engagement, is there any change in the engagement metric based on the theme itself. And it to be frank, it was just about a 1% drop in the dark mode, but then dark mode was showing got a lot of potential in the sense of sustainability. It was giving us an edge that our team was able to produce better designs and had that delight factor in use as well. So then eventually we turned into a all dark mode app. So it took, like I said, it took 6 months to take all these calls.
Yeah, so basically doing controlled user group experience and then identifying how the metrics are transversing,
Exactly.
implementing it on. And I believe something like dark mode is also something that gets forced on an app, because let's say if every other app, every other organization is bringing something on that side, because even Google Chrome or all the browsers bought that. Now the phones have a reading mode,
Yeah.
monochromatic mode, you have dark version of things.
Yeah.
So sometimes I believe the experiments also get forced on to do things.
Experiments as in, I didn't get that.
So I mean, did you also get information, or these are the things that everyone is doing? So you have to try it out. Is it working out for you guys or not?
It's not like that. It's not like that, because again, I think one should never do that. If someone is doing, it's completely. I would not recommend it if there are few competitors in the market who are doing and you start doing it blindly. So for us, why we chose to go to dark mode was particularly because we were visuals heavy app. So because we were catering a lot more on the imagery. We had a lot of movie posters. We had a lot of imagery of the people, like actors and actresses. And if you look at it, you will understand it looks much more pleasing on a dark platform, right? But I would not suggest that. We don't really do that. So for me, like if we are moving to dark mode on Wink, I still chose to be on a white mode for Wink Studio, which is a creators platform which allows the users to upload their content. The whole reason behind that was that during that journey, when someone is uploading the content, they have to do a lot of input and output. They have to read contracts. They have to understand if whatever content they are giving, what are the rights and terms and conditions are involved. And if you think from that perspective, where there is such a lot of reading and everything is involved, our eyes are trained to read much more faster and much more better on the white platform itself. Because right from the childhood we are reading books, we are reading, the copy is always had white in the background. So that's why I chose to be white in the Wing Studio platform. So I'll say the whole summary to it that we are not doing that. We don't really believe on doing something out of a pressure. Only if it's required, we evaluate that, and only then we proceed.
Yeah, makes sense. So there is a question from one of the participants. How it is made sure that after the experimentation is done, it does not affect the way users can still use the app as they used to do it easily before the experimentation.
Okay. So like I said, so the only answer to it is that you do the incremental changes. The user will only start, maybe you will get a pushback from user only when you do a drastic change and he is not able to find that particular button that he was usually looking for. So during the experiment, we break down into smaller chunks and we tried releasing one by one, get their feedbacks and then implement it.
Awesome. So, guys, if there are no more questions, then I think we can wrap up the session. Last chance. Any more questions, anybody? Okay, awesome. So I think we've come to the end of our session. Thanks, Maanik, for taking the time out. It was absolutely amazing to learn about metrics and the kind of experiments we can have, and a lot about Airtel as well. And thanks everyone for attending. I'm sure you can connect with Maanik on LinkedIn and ADPList as well after this. And if you guys have any feedback, feel free to reach out. And before we go, Design Boat has their demo sessions on Sundays. So if you're keen on this field, UI UX field, then you can always go and attend those sessions, know more about it, and register for the boot camps. So thanks again, Maanik. I had an amazing time conversing with you and Utkarsh as well.
Yeah, same here. So I really liked the session, and you can obviously reach out to me on LinkedIn or on ADPList if you have any more questions. I'll be really happy to answer those. And thanks for this opportunity. It was really nice interacting with you guys.
Thank you, Maanik. Thanks for
Thanks,
taking the
thanks a lot,
time.
Manik. Thanks a lot to the audience as well, attending on a Saturday evening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Have a good rest of the day and the weekend. Bye bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.